It's a challenging time to be a teacher. We don't get paid a lot, the days can be long and exhausting, demands from students, parents, admins, and districts can be intense. There's always room for improvement and there is always more to do. There are always new procedures to learn, new programs to run, new strategies to master. But it's when our fire burns the lowest that we remember our purpose. We teach because we're resilient. We teach because we're problem solvers. We teach because investing in kids is one of the highest callings we can imagine. We teach because we know that the classroom can be a place of magic and possibility. We teach because we have an unquenchable fire for learning and a passion to share it. We teach because our colleagues are some of the best human beings we will ever meet. We teach because we have an opportunity to influence the global citizens that will make this world a better place. If you're still on fire for learning and growth, join the Teachers on Fire Roundtable for conversations that will warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your practice. You'll hear from real people and real educators with real solutions, not make-believe perfection, but ideas, inspiration, and a path toward change and transformation in K-12 education today. My name is Tim Cavey. I'm an 8th grade teacher, assistant principal, and the host of the Teachers on Fire podcast. I'm inviting you to join us at the Teachers on Fire Roundtable. Because you matter, your voice is important, and we are all better together. Good morning, Teachers on Fire. Welcome back to another conversation that will warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. I am so excited to be joined by Marcus Blair this morning. We're going to be introduced to him shortly. But first of all, welcome to our live audience. If you are joining us today, right now, first of all, if you're here on the West Coast, thank you for getting up so early. And if you are Central, Eastern, across this great continent, or around the world, thank you for joining us as well. We'd love to hear from you and let us know where you are joining from. We've got already in the house Shannon Schinkel coming to us live from Prince George. Good morning to you, Shannon. She says, looking forward to today's episode, more assessment beautifulness. Yes, absolutely. We are on the same page with you. So welcome to Marcus Blair. Marcus, would you start us off by just introducing yourself? Talk a little bit about your context in education today, and we'll work from there.
Well, yeah, I'm Marcus Blair. I teach out of Summerland Secondary School in the beautiful Okanagan. I teach Senior English, Philosophy 12, and Social Justice 12. And I also am the Indigenous Success Advisor at my high school. And in terms of my work in education, my passions are certainly, at the moment, project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, and all things assessment. That's where I currently focus a lot of my time.
Those are some juicy topics, Marcus. Can't wait to dig into them. We've also got another BC hello. It's Brian Carpenter coming to us from lovely Abbotsford. Brian, let us know if you got out for your morning walk at 5. I know that doesn't always happen on Saturdays, but we'd love to hear if you've been out this morning. It's been very rainy here in the Lower Mainland lately, Marcus. I don't know what it's been like in your area. And Brian wants to say a welcome to Marcus as well. Well, thanks, Marcus, for setting that up and letting us know a little bit about your context. Now, we hear so much, at least I do, in my Twitter PLN and podcast from the Cult of Pedagogy and Angela Watson and so many other places that, you know, this is, for some teachers, this is like the worst year ever. So I wanted to start with this. Does this conversation around teacher burnout resonate with you at all? And where would you put yourself on that scale from teacher burnout to teacher on fire? How do you feel right now?
At the moment, I feel okay. I feel pretty good, but I completely empathize with a lot of teachers who are struggling this year. For me, in my own context, last year was a tough year. We transitioned to a quarter system, which went from having hour and 20 blocks to 3-hour blocks, just 2 a day. And that was a huge transition for me personally. I really had to change everything I did in the classroom to make it work. So I found last year was definitely the time when I felt the most burnout.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that resonates for me and a lot of my colleagues as well. That last 2020 was kind of the shock to the system, and we survived that lockdown spring, and then last year's school year was a really tough one, and this year feels like to me at least personally, it feels like things have been lightened just a little bit. It's still not easy, but as you said, last year I know at the secondary level was tough across British Columbia, at least, and other jurisdictions. I know some of my colleagues were, if you're in that quarter system, it's feast or famine. I don't know if you found that, but you might have had a quarter there where you had a spare or maybe two spares or whatever that looked like, and then others where you're just teaching without a break.
No, for sure. Yeah, like one quarter I had 2 senior English classes. And once you add up the marking, you add up the just not having a break and then getting home and having to mark all those papers or set up assessment conversations for the next day.
Yeah.
It was no break. And then the next quarter, like you say, I had my prep. So it was pretty good. I had a lot of time to pursue my passions the next quarter.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Marcus, you're one of these people that I'm just so honored and privileged to sort of have this show, this little construct that allows me to speak with people like you that light up my Twitter feed and keep me inspired on a daily and weekly basis. You are one of these people that I've been following for a while. In fact, Shannon was there at a dinner in the summer where a number of BC educators got together in downtown Vancouver, and your name came up as one of those people that really, truly inspire us. So I'm just excited to be chatting with you this morning, and I want to dig into one of your recent posts on your blog. It's tough to speak on Saturday mornings, but you recently wrote how to meaningfully implement the new K-12 student reporting policy at the secondary level. So can you talk more about the idea of essential power standards in each course? Can you get into that post and particularly this idea of the power standards?
For sure. Yeah. So the impetus behind the post was I really wanted to create kind of a step-by-step guide. And honestly, it was more for myself in a lot of ways to kind of get my thoughts on paper and how am I going to make this transition? How might my school make this transition? And how might BC make this transition? And in terms of power standards, these essential standards, that's an idea I think is truly essential, not to pull a pun out. Yeah, you're going, yeah. So essential standards are basically what teachers want their student to be able to know or to do before they leave the class. And that gentleman there, Larry Ainsworth, he talks about them having endurance, leverage, and essentiality. Endurance is this idea that these standards are not just important for this unit, this project, they're important for life. They're skills you need to know beyond the classroom. And leverage, they could be skills that are used in multiple classrooms. They could be used in the science room. They could be used in social study classes. And this idea of essentiality, they move vertically from different English. So like English 9 to English 10, English 11, English 12, they'll still be important. They'll still be integral to the classroom. So the example I always use is one like I can support an opinion with evidence. That's one of the curricular competencies from the ELA curriculum. And I think most people would agree that is a skill that transfers to life. And if you look on any social media platform, that's not a skill that's always being practiced.
Mm-hmm.
So my idea behind that is these essential standards, they offer departments like a starting point to start collaboration, start conversations, and kind of building this common language, common expectations, and eventually common proficiency sequences around those standards. And it's not to say that the other standards or curricular competencies don't matter. They truly do. It's just these essential standards, they're the types of learning that students they'll do throughout the semester, not just one project. It might be almost every analytical experience you'll be supporting an opinion with evidence.
Yeah. All right, that makes a lot of sense. And if I can ask you to keep on going, so I'm going to keep this screen share up. So again, the subtitle here is what can departments be doing? I love the practicality of that. So you say start with identifying these essential power standards, and then talk about number 2, create proficiency scales or learning sequences for those essential standards first. So what can you tell us about creating these learning sequences?
These learning sequences, yeah, it's because one criticism I suppose I hear about the new curriculum is it's very vague in certain respects. They put the skills on the left, the curricular competencies, and then sometimes they're even tough to define. What exactly does that mean? So what I'm proposing, I'm not the first one to propose this by any means, is you work collaboratively as a department and you unpack these standards. You define what is essential and you start with those first, and then you create these proficiency sequences, learning sequences. I know Shannon has her own, which is really inspiring, her own variety of, I think they're learning progressions. And you talk about what does the standard look like at each of these proficiency levels? What does an extending student look like at this idea of using conventions of Canadian spelling, grammar, and punctuation? What is proficiency? And at the other end, what is emerging? What does the emerging student look like? I believe it just provides departments with a lot of common ground, a good starting point. So then if teachers are kind of transitioning in schools, they have somewhere to start and they can feel like they know the conversations that have been discussed in that department beforehand. And these are also living documents. So they can be changed at any point and adjusted, made better, completely revamped. And that's what I propose. Nothing set in stone. I think that's truly important.
Yeah, this is really rich. I want to be clear that, and I should probably bring up one of the high school ELA curricular documents so people can get a sense. But at the top in the yellow, Marcus has one curricular competency. So this is breaking down. This is getting pretty granular, but I find that clarity really helpful. And as you said, when a department works on this together, what you get is this common language, common understanding. So when a student demonstrates a certain level of proficiency in one room, they should sort of be treated, or they should, I want to word this carefully, but they should be assessed the same or receive the same kinds of feedback from the classroom next door. Is that part of the goal?
That's the complete intent behind it. And like the document right there, I probably wouldn't give to students in its current form. Maybe the I can statements. Mm-hmm. In terms of the characteristics, I created that as more as like a teacher tool. Mm-hmm. When they start to assess, these are kind of things you could be looking for that might jump out to, like this idea of maybe a proficient student with using conventions. They'll capitalize all the proper nouns. Mm-hmm. They'll use kind of these high frequency commas correctly. So it just gives the teacher some things to look out for when they're assessing, especially those teachers who might not be too acclimated to the curriculum or even teaching English language arts.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, while we're talking, I might try to bring up one of these curricular documents. That might be helpful if you're coming to us from another province or state or country around the world. And then third, Marcus, talk about identifying essential content for each of the department's classes. So, I mean, is this putting together a book list, a resource list? Talk more about this.
It can be. I kind of kept it vague because
yeah,
I'm one of those people, I don't want to tread on anybody's teacher autonomy.
yeah.
But for me, the intent is more to avoid overlap and having kind of a logical grade to grade progression. So then the grade 11 teacher, they know kind of just the gist of what is being taught in English 10, like what content, like they'll have an expectation that students will be familiar with metaphor or simile or whatever else that they define as essential content for those different grade areas. So then you have a lot of freedom, but there's also certain points you want to hit. And I think it'll be helpful for teachers to form their projects, form their units, form their learning opportunities.
Yeah, all right. So good. I'm going to pause it there for now. That gets really rich. A few comments here from the audience. So let me catch up here. Shannon is saying, okay, I think I displayed that one, just talking about teacher fatigue. Love the word endurance. And she's asking this, have you reworded the curricular competencies to become these essential standards? Do you want to take that one?
I have not reworded. Sometimes I use that interchangeably, which I don't know if that's technically correct or not. But I tend to use them kind of interchangeably. I mean curricular competencies. It'd be more the essential curricular competencies, I suppose.
Yeah. And she's also asking, are any of your progressions cyclical, similar from grade to grade? I think you may have answered that, but what are your thoughts there?
Yes, there will be slight higher expectations of sophistication and different ways to, but yeah, they'll resemble each other, and they'll slowly evolve grade to grade.
Yeah. So very exciting here in British Columbia. We are, for some time in K to 7 schools, we've been moving towards standards-based grading and different forms of assessment. This provincial proficiency scale, and now that is we see that moving more into the secondary level. So the next important question is to talk about your gradebook. And I think you have a screenshot of it on the same post, so I'll try to go back to that post. But Can you talk about how that is utilized and how you set that up?
The gradebook it's honestly a new transition for me this year. In the past, I've relied more on the MyEd system.
Right.
Which I found I'm just not the most tech savvy. So I've kind of struggled to create like a workable, more standards-based gradebook on the MyEd system. I'm sure it's possible. I've been assured it is. I just can't quite figure it out. So I transitioned over to Excel. And like I said, I'm not the most technologically savvy. But I created this.
Yet.
Yeah, that's what I always tell my students. You're not a reader yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really just, instead of organizing it by categories like tests, quizzes, homework, projects, I organized it by curricular competencies. And I find the social studies curriculum or curricula in particular are actually, it lends itself well to a standards-based gradebook. There isn't like 30 different curricular competencies. There's only like 8. So on the top, you'll notice I have continuity and change, ethical judgment, significance. And then it carries on a little to the right. That's just a screenshot. But those are the curricular competencies of the social studies curriculum. And then down below that, I have that DOL number 1, DOL number 2, DOL number 3. And that's demonstration of learning. So I'm not sure how many demonstrations I'll be able to fit in a semester, but I'll do my best to hit these curricular competencies more than once. And this is where the teacher discretion comes in. And I talked to Tom Schimmer just a week ago, and we talked for about an hour just about the Mark book. So I'm probably echoing a lot of his thoughts because he really helped me organize my own Mark book and starting to transition that also into my ELA Mark book. But basically, it's this idea of moving away from calculating and moving towards determining grades. So if you have 2 demonstrations of learning for like continuity and change, one was a developing for whatever reason, and then the most recent is a proficient. As the teacher, generally speaking, not always, there's a lot of discretion here, I'll put more weight onto the proficient, the more recent example of this learning. So when it comes time to determine that final mark, I'll go along and I'll figure out what is the most honest, most holistic representation of that skill. And often it might be the most recent, and that's the one I'll put the stock in when it comes to determining that grade and their final proficiency for the course.
That's really cool. Now, I love deep diving, and I might lose some viewers or listeners here, but I think this is where it really gets interesting. I know Shannon's with us. Shannon, it's so fun to have you here. We should really get the 3 of us in the same conversation here at some point, but I want to pull up the course that you're referring to. So I've got it here. Let me see if I can find the right tab. So for anyone not familiar with the British Columbia curriculum, this is Social Justice 12, and this is the whole curriculum. What you were looking at is the entire curriculum. Now, all of these can be expanded, in terms of the content. There's lots of suggestions. And over here on the competency side, these can all be expanded as well. So there's more here than what initially meets the eye. But what you've done is you've actually taken each of what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 different curricular competencies, and you've created a separate column, or pardon me, 3 columns for each one. Do I have that right?
Yes. Yeah, there's no guarantee I'll hit each one 3 times, but I just wanted to have that built in. That's the dream, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I mean, as I was saying to my team, the way when we structure our gradebook, that actually starts to shape our instruction and our assessment.
Yes.
And we're approaching it entirely differently because we're mindful of, and I want to get away from this idea of giving instruction to fill a gradebook. That's not really what it's about, but I guess what I'm trying to say is this change in model or paradigm shapes our instruction in a positive way. Would you agree?
Very much so.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's like, we always talk about the mark because that's one of the most complicating factors. It's problematic sometimes. Well, why I'm most excited about this kind of move towards standards-based grading is actually the day-to-day instruction.
Yes.
This idea of kind of organizing every learning activity, every lesson around these standards, around these specific curricular competencies. Because people often say like, students won't do it if it's not marked. But I'm a big believer, not always, but students will be more likely to do it if they see a direct connection to the skills they'll be assessed on.
Right.
So if I'm assessing on like conventions, if we spend a day kind of talking about, 10 minutes talking about semicolons, and I tell them explicitly, this is a way for you to demonstrate more sophisticated representation of that convention's skill.
Right. Right. So good. On that topic, on that note, Marcus, you tweeted yesterday, what's this project worth? As a question that many teachers still get, depending on their jurisdiction and where they are located. And your answer, it's worth doing. It's about demonstrating proficiency now, not earning points. I thought that was so good. So as I said off the top, thank you, Marcus, for continuing these provocative conversations around assessment. Well, it is Halloween weekend, Marcus. And so first of all, happy Halloween. What is one, by the way, really big deal in my neighborhood. I'll probably see about 300 kids tomorrow night. What is one assessment practice that scares you? And then we'll flip this and make it positive here in a moment. But let's start there.
What scares me most, I guess, is this idea of handing students zeros and late penalties. I just believe and I know it happens. I know why it happens. Teaching's hard.
Yeah.
But it obscures their mark. It takes away from like the mark being a representation of their actual learning, and you're putting in these behavioral factors.
Right.
Which, I don't think it's very equitable, and I know the province is shifting away from that. So that's 2 things that scare me. And I used to do myself. I used to do that in my practice, at least the zeros. Yeah. But I shifted away from that 100% now.
When I remember when I started in a middle school in Vancouver, I was introduced to the assessment policy of the school I was at, and there was a very strict protocol of if an assignment comes in 1 day late, it's 10% off. 2 days late is 25% off. 3 days late, not accepted, or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but these old systems are anyway, enough said about that. Moving on to the second, more positive part. What's one change you'd like to see more secondary educators make?
One change I would like to make. For me, I think it's that definitely moving to proficiency language and organizing all assessments around those curricular competencies. And I think it's a change that mandate is really gonna compel to happen. But that's definitely one change. Is for every time you're assessing students, have a curricular competency you're assessing. That way you can ensure that their mark will be about their learning. It won't be about those other factors, those behavioral factors. It's just connecting projects, connecting tasks to those curricular competencies and this idea of proficiency.
Brian says, great discussion this morning. Not good at assessment at this level yet. Yes, Brian, I'm glad you included that yet. That's very important. Well, I want to just quickly say thank you so much to our live and replay audience for joining us. If you're enjoying this conversation, please consider subscribing to the channel here on YouTube. Your support is appreciated. That's the single best way to say thank you. Marcus, this week you tweeted, anyone know of any publishing or creative writing opportunities or contests for students? Now, contest, I hope we can get into a couple parts of this here, actually. Some students need a grander platform than my desk. So first of all, give us the background. Tell us about these amazing students that you've got, and then let's talk about where you took it from there.
Yeah, I guess the impetus for this is I tend to incorporate a lot of creative writing in my English language arts classroom. I truly believe those creative opportunities are integral to building well-rounded language arts students. So I think it was last year I had a student come up to me in the hallway I taught the previous year. Said, guess what, Mr. Blair? I entered that story I wrote for your class into a short story writing contest, and I came third. And I was just so pumped for it. And then I had another student last year, it's the same story. I entered a story into this contest in the summer and I came like second. It just kind of blew me away. And I wasn't surprised. I knew the writing was brilliant. I didn't know how to show other people the writing. Sometimes I turn around to my partner, she's also a teacher, and I'd be like, you have to hear this line. And I'd read it to her and she'd smile, and she's a math teacher, so I don't think she was as interested as I am. And then I think it was a month ago, I saw a post on, I think it was the BC Tela Facebook group. It was an opportunity for students to write an article proposal for an online magazine. I believe it's The Walrus. So I showed my social justice 12th class that opportunity to every student. And then there was a few students I nudged a little more. I have a few students I know they want to get into journalism. So then the other day, one of those students came up to me like, I'm sending you my article proposal. Can you give it a read before I send it into the online magazine? So it's like, I don't want the writing to kind of just end on my desk.
Right.
Like I say it's good writing, you get an A. I want the world to be able to read the writing because they're so talented. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the impetus of that. So I want to kind of make these opportunities available to them, definitely make them aware of them, and build their confidence through them.
Yeah, I love that. And you've actually restored my faith a little bit in contest, because that's the part that I wanted to get to, this idea that students should enter contests, because my fear is, my teacher protective heart says, what if they put their blood, sweat, and tears into something and send it off to some contest and it doesn't get much recognition or even a response or what have you. I don't want their soul to be crushed. I'd rather they publish that content in a space. I think I responded to the tweet with Medium. There's Quora. There's all these other online forums and places where students can start to build platforms of their own, or maybe they're just their very own blog, right? So I think both can be true. And I like the idea that your students are repurposing these stories that they've already crafted in your class or elsewhere, and they're sending them off to different contests. That's really, really exciting. Well, congrats if you are one of Mr. Blair's students and you've made it and you've gotten this recognition. Keep it going. I think that's fantastic. And as a content creator, just to park on this for a moment, I so believe that confidence and competence increase with consistent publication, consistent creation. That's why I make sure that I meet here every Saturday morning, even when I'm tired and not feeling like it, because I know that over time, imperceptibly, there will be some improvements in my confidence and competence, and that groundswell, that momentum actually creates new opportunities. So I would say the same to any student, right, Marcus, that like just keep at it and let those creative juices flow. And that, I mean, you read all of the great writers, and as they talk about writing, that's some of their advice. So anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess it's that idea, same thing with those essential standards. It's about endurance, that your skills, they transcend the classroom.
Right.
They'll work in the real world because they're good. You're good at writing. And that's
Hmm.
what it's about, I think, is just building that confidence, like you said.
Yeah. Well, Marcus, speaking of that, what motivates you to share your thoughts on Twitter, on your blog? And we sort of laughed off air about it is so hard to maintain consistent blog publication as an educator with everything else that we're dealing with, but it really is our sweet spot, right? Our place of flow. As you said earlier, when you have the wherewithal to actually put together a post, it's so clarifying for ourselves first and foremost. But talk to those educators, those wonderful colleagues that we have that are supremely committed. They're fantastic teachers and instructors. They love kids, but they just haven't been sold on this idea of why share my thoughts on a place like Twitter or a blog? Why put it out there beyond the walls of my own building? What would your response be?
I guess for me, Twitter started as a place for me just to house and store my thoughts around teaching, kind of my learning journey in the profession. And after a while, some of the things that I were posting were resonating. Some people had some criticisms, but it was all helpful. It helped me refine my practice. It helped lead me to new ideas, better ideas too, and connect with some of these most talented teachers like Shannon Shinkle.
Yeah.
Shout out. She was one of the
Shout out.
first teachers I followed on Twitter, and she's certainly inspired me these last few years. And I find, honestly, it's just such a great place to connect with talented, like-minded teachers. And I don't pretend to have all the answers with my thoughts, but I know I have similar questions to a lot of educators in BC. How can I make this transition work to this new reporting language? I have a lot of the same questions, and hopefully some people have answers, or we can just discuss these questions on a platform with teachers all over the province, not just the teachers in your staff room.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. So good. Well, as I said, again, I've so benefited, Marcus, from your provocative questions and inspiring observations, and I want to thank you personally for that, and look forward to more learning together. So you mentioned Shannon. Who else's voice is inspiring you right now? And this could be another educator in the province, or maybe it's a podcast that you're listening to, or a book that you can't get enough of. Who is lighting you up right now?
Oh, there's a couple individuals. I don't know if many people know this, but I have the pleasure of working with Myron Duick.
Okay. Oh, cool.
He's my vice principal at my school, and he's pretty well known in the assessment world. He's written a couple books on the matter. So we get to kind of sit down on sometimes almost a daily basis and talk assessment. And he's really helped me along on my teaching journey, helped refine my thinking, and got some opportunities to collaborate with him. So he's definitely probably my biggest assessment inspiration. And then lately, I've been digging into Tom Schimmer's work, which I found extremely helpful as I transitioned to standards-based grading in a more sophisticated way. And I actually got an opportunity to talk to Tom the other day for an hour just about standards-based grading and how I can implement it in my own practice in a more refined way.
I don't know how he finds the time. I was able to connect with him at a restaurant in Coquitlam in the summer. He's a very generous individual. But yeah, if you're listening, no matter where you're located, Tom speaks literally around the world. Tom Schimmer, another shout out as a speaker, author, thinker in this assessment space that actually, or absolutely rather, is a must read, must listen to. And if you're a podcast listener, if you're catching this on the Teachers on Fire podcast, make sure to tune into the Tom Schimmer podcast. Easy name to remember. Well, what is lighting you up? We talked about voices that are inspiring you. What are you involved in right now, Marcus? Or is there some activity at your school? You talked a little bit about some of the work you're doing with your students. What is really igniting your fire at the moment?
Right now, it's maybe not the most exciting thing, but I'm in this process of really kind of refining my proficiency sequences for my humanities classes. So that's social justice 12 and philosophy 12. And I'm just meticulously going through these different curricular competencies. And I find just the act of going through each curricular competency, unpacking it, trying to define the different proficiency levels, looking at common characteristics on how can I assess these more accurately, and how can I provide richer descriptive feedback. That's kind of what's firing me up right now. it's laborious, but I believe it's the most enriching professional development you can do.
Yeah, I've worked with middle school educators, seventh grade educators on our British Columbia FSA exams. I'm sure you're familiar with those. And one of the, of course, as you said, it is laborious work, but one of the more enriching parts of that process is actually sitting down with other educators and evaluating student writing together and just having conversations about, hey, look at this. Where do you think this fits? What is it demonstrating? And the more of those kinds of collegial conversations we can have, I think the better off we will all be. Well, this brings us to the end of our conversation, Marcus. It's been rich. It's been wonderful. And I look forward to more. What are the best ways for us to connect with you? We want to talk about Twitter and say that handle out loud for the podcast listeners. And of course, the blog is there. So mention the blog URL and anything else that you'd like to as well.
Yeah, you can definitely best reach me on Twitter at Mr. Blair's Class. And then my blog, I have ambitions of writing more, so hopefully it'll be I'll say monthly posts, but it's at, where is it? One sec. MrBlairsClass.blogspot.com.
MrBlairsClass.blogspot.com. And thank you again with my Twitter sample. This is not the reason I am hosting Marcus this week, but I actually discovered after the fact that you've included that tweet of mine in your latest post. So thank you so much for that and just for encouraging me as well. Is there a way on this blog, Marcus? Is there a way for people to subscribe to the blog? Do you know?
I believe there is.
Okay, I'll have to track that down and make sure.
That might be left up to them to figure out. As I said, but I know you can subscribe to Blogger accounts.
Okay, good.
Excellent. Some ways somehow.
Well, I know that's one thing that I really like about WordPress blogs is that you can, usually there are a couple different mechanisms there to subscribe and actually have them come to my inbox. I find that's an important part for my personal habits, my reading. Well, thank you again, Marcus, for sharing your Saturday morning with me. I look forward to more conversations and to meeting you in person. Hopefully we can make that happen. And if Shannon's still around, Shannon, we'll have to include Marcus in our next summer BC Educators Get-Together down in Vancouver in Olympic Village. But until then, Marcus, take care. Keep on that learning track. Keep sharing your learning. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Tim, for having me. I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity. And have a fantastic Saturday morning.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, that is in the books. Thank you so much, Marcus. That was a lot of